Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And if you're watching this versus listening to it, you will see me happily talking but not being heard because I was unaware that my audio had gone south. So, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in what I was doing at that time, which was an intro for my guest, which was the author by the name of Mario Becerra. He's written a book, A Haunted East Los Angeles, and Mario was born and raised in East LA. And he graduated from Cal State with a degree in English. And in his spare time, he spends time with his family, dances tango, and write ghost stories, which I explained further on. One of the things I like about interviewing authors who write stories about their hometown. So here we go. I'm going to patch this up, and luckily I was able to realize that my audio was not working. So here we go, guys.
There's a school called Stevenson Middle School. It was originally called Stevenson Junior High School. I actually attended this school when I was a teenager. But there was someone who went in the middle of the night, because you hear, my dad walks around this school, just so I can bring it to a personal level. My dad walks around this school to get his exercise. He's older and he wants to get his exercise because he lives right next to it. And he tells me that he hears little kids laughing, like at 8, 9 o'clock at night when it's dark. And he's like, there's no one there. It's completely dark. And these are little kids. They're not teenagers. So that piqued my curiosity. And I started, my cousin Victor, which helped me research the book, he started asking some questions because he's a lot more involved in the paranormal community. And he met a group of folks that went in there late at night because they had also heard the stories about these children, and they played the Ouija board. And in playing the Ouija board, they got responses from the children, who they thought were the children. And one of them was, they asked the question, how did you die? And they responded in a fire. So we try to find, like in the almanac or the history of that area, a record of a fire, but we haven't been able to find anything. But these children are they're very playful. They're not evil. They're children. And even interviewing the janitors and people like that, they even told us that, these children play tricks on them, where, the janitors, they stay at night, the night crew, and they'll go in to clean the gym, and the water will turn on, and they'll hear laughing and running. And the janitor is so used to it that it doesn't scare him anymore, and now he reprimands them. He says, you guys need to stop doing that because I need to finish up my work. It's because he's so used to it. He says it happens so much that it's not even, when it first happened, of course, it scared the bejesus out of me. But now that it happens so often, he says you'd be amazed at what human beings get used to. So he's gotten used to the children. At the school, too, this is a more insidious haunting. There's what they call a shadow person that lurks in the gym area, and people have seen them. And I like it when the stories come from people that don't know each other, because
Yes, you know what? I think that lends a lot of validity when, like you said, it's like, hey, there was no two people that said, hey, they got together on it. Like, there's no connection between them whatsoever.
Right. So with that corroboration, you begin to think, maybe there is something going on here. But people have reported seeing this really tall, like 8, 9 foot shadow man,
Wow.
just kind of lurking on the sides of the gym, and it's always accompanied with a lot of fear. They always feel a lot of fear when they see him.
I bet.
Uh,
And you said
so
this is
then,
just a you said it was just a middle school?
it's just a middle school in East LA, and it's I guess it just comes alive at night.
And how long is it, like an older school? How long has it been there?
It's been there, I want to say, since the 1920s. So yeah, it's been there for
Okay.
a little while.
Yeah, it's going almost. It'll soon be 100 years. A lot of things happen in 100 years,
Absolutely.
and the reason why I asked you also is because and I'm sure you're aware of it, especially when you do the research. We get used to because of how modern day, or when I say recent, between newspapers, magazines, now the internet, just about everything somehow or other gets noted. But back then, a lot of things would happen that not necessarily was ever recorded. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but if you try to do the research, and let's say you're trying, like you were saying, we have these reports of these little children that are heard laughing, and either by people that are walking, like your dad, walking around the perimeter, or people that work there. All right, and like you said, that you had that Ouija board thing where they're saying they died by fire, and I'm sure if you try to research it, you might not find it. Uh, a lot of things sometimes happen that not necessarily, even though the newspapers picked up on a lot of stuff, there was other stuff that sometimes just um, couldn't be accounted for, or uh, sometimes if it wasn't the actual school, it was something that was there before, maybe a house that used to sit on that land, and it burnt down, and
Right. Right.
they built they used the land for the school. That happens a lot. Especially back then, when a lot more houses were built from wood or highly flammable, or people, would light with candles and things like that. You hear about it all the time, of big fires, like sometimes taking out half the city and things like this. Um, and Like I said, I know that there's a lot of the stories that are so well known. Did you did you ever have, how some neighborhoods have the haunted house in their neighborhood? Did you have one like that in the area that you lived in? The spooky old haunted house kind of thing?
Um, yeah, we kind of did. My my aunt Gloria also lives in East LA. Right
Okay.
next door to her, there was an abandoned house,
Okay.
and I don't know if because it was abandoned, we thought it was haunted. But it just had a spooky feel to it, and a lot of the kids teenagers would go in and
Right.
play around, and they always said that they used to hear things, or supposedly there was a man who they would see hanging off of one of the door stops.
Wow.
But I mean, I never saw anything. My cousins and I went in there. We never saw anything. But yeah, there was definitely that house.
Yeah, I know.
That
That's what I was saying. There's always a house. One of two things, like you said, it's either been abandoned and it stays abandoned and it gets that spooky, and after a while everybody, like, it takes on a life of its own. And other times, the things happen in certain houses, where either you have murders or suicides, and people afterwards are scared to move in them, and then of course from then on, they get that bad reputation. Sometimes with good reason,
right,
other times not. Um, Sometimes, you have certain houses where, let's say if they're a rental property, people, like, it's like a revolving door of renters. And then eventually the word gets out that there's something going on in the house, that it's haunted or something's going on. And
right.
you live in the area where Ramirez was captured in, the serial killer, right?
Yeah, yeah. I grew up. Yeah, East LA. He was captured right. I lived on Princeton Street, and he
Mm-hmm.
was captured right on Hubbard Street, which is the street right next to Princeton. Uh, I remember that day very vividly because I was outside playing. I was only like 6 years old at the
Mm-hmm.
time,
Okay.
and the helicopters, I remember, just started circling, maybe 3 or 4 helicopters, and I got scared. So my mom ran out, and my grandfather, and they said, hey, they said in Spanish, agarraron al matón, they caught the killer.
Right.
And so we walked over, which was only a block away, and by the time we got there, they already had him in handcuffs in the cop car, and he
Wow.
was bandaged up because they had beaten him pretty badly. But there was a line to see him, and we got in line and we saw him, and then we went home. But Yeah, that guy was super scary.
No, he. You know what? Everybody, of course, because of his thing with, that he was a Satanist, or he said he was a Satanist, or blah blah blah. I think to myself, yeah, that's all good and dandy, but just the fact that you're going around and you're cold-bloodedly killing people, I don't care what you believe in. That's the part that's scary as far as I'm concerned. Okay, regardless
Absolutely.
of what your belief systems are, uh, and he already passed away, right? I believe not too long ago.
Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago from B-cell lymphoma. They said that when he died, he was the color of a green highlighter.
Really?
But yeah, he died in a state hospital near San Quentin where he was housed.
Yeah, because I believe, what was it? They didn't have the death sentence already in California by the time he got arrested, right? I'm not sure. I know that there was around that they had repealed it, I believe, and that's why people like that, and did he ever say anything as far as how sometimes, because I've never really followed too much of what happened to him after he got arrested and he went into the jail system, but you'll have some of these murderers, like let's say Son of Sam, who now, is quote unquote a model prisoner and has a ministry and blah blah blah, even though he's never going to see the streets again. Did he ever express any type of remorse or anything
You
as
know,
far
I
as?
saw I
Go ahead.
saw an interview that he did when he
Hmm.
was in prison, maybe 15 years into his sentence,
Right.
where this reporter starts asking him, did you kill these people? And he didn't say. He would say, I cannot comment on that because of my appeal. Uh, so the reporter's like, so did you kill him or not? And he's like, again, I cannot comment on that because of my appeal. But he started spouting a bunch of, you could tell they were lines that he had thought up and he had
Okay.
rehearsed.
Okay.
And, things like, serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large scale.
Oh,
Uh,
right. Okay. Yeah.
so,
All right. Yeah. In other
yeah, so
words,
he, uh-huh.
yeah. That.
So he was definitely trying to justify what he did. And then they
Right.
asked him, do you consider yourself evil? And he says, yeah, I think all of us are evil in one way or another. Uh, so things like that. So I've never heard of him expressing remorse or, anyone who ever talked to him or got interviewed say he ever expressed remorse for what he did.
Doesn't sound like it. And I was going to tell you that line about we're all evil. That's very much sounds like Luciferianism, where they kind of look at all mankind as evil. Like, I'm not the odd man out because in reality we're all bad. Again, that
Right?
doesn't point much to the fact that he doesn't sound like he was remorseful. He was just probably sorry he got caught. Um, and
Well, I mean, let us say for the sake of argument that we all are evil in one way or another. We're not all out there killing people,
no, well,
so
no, of course we're not. Nobody's because I guess what I'm saying is, of course, people. There's some people that do bad things, like you said, but don't murder somebody. We're not all perfect, but I think that line in the sand is when you take the life of another human being, especially when you're taking the life of another human being who you have nothing against. There's no love, revenge, hate. You know how sometimes people get into disputes. It's a love thing or a revenge thing, or he was killing people that he had. There was nothing there for him to say. What they call the crimes of passion in the old days. It's like
right.
that's being very, very cold blooded, and to me, that's the line in the sand where, okay, you step over that, and as far as I'm concerned, you're in the evil category. Sorry, because yeah, there's no way to justify that. It really isn't. And I'm glad he was caught, and you know, and he was not out there doing any more harm to people. And I know that a lot of times there's I work with a network that deals with either unidentified victims, when they find skeletal remains,
Yes.
or people that are missing that have never been found. And it's incredible how many people are out there that go missing and are never found, or vice versa, that the remains are never found. And they have no idea who this person is. And a lot of times, I would say about 80% of the times, they've met their ends because somebody murdered them. In other words, they didn't go under a tree and die. They were killed and they were dumped. And unfortunately, there's no way to identify them for whatever reason, and that happens. So that's why I'm saying I'm glad somebody like him got caught and put in jail. But let's get back to the paranormal stuff. And the reason, and even though I think those two things, Mario, sometimes go hand in hand, I say it before, because a lot of these deeds, what these people, sometimes they do create active hauntings, especially by some of these victims, or a victim that's never found, and or I think, which would be the scariest, if you have one of these serial killers who comes back in spirit form. I think that's got to be the most terrifying thing to think of. As far as, because everybody always thinks, well, what happens to these serial killers once they die? Depending on your belief, do they go to hell? Are they taken into heaven? Or what if they're scared and they hang out in that in between state, uh, and they go back to haunt some of the places that they used to either work, be more comfortable at. Whether, as a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, I heard, I don't know, I want to say it's a little bit longer. I'm saying 2 or 3 months, maybe like in September. An article came out about Ted Bundy's childhood home, and there was some type of contractor working in there, and he was saying that he thinks it was haunted because of all the things that were going on. And I was like, well, that's not unusual when you think about it, because these are very disturbed people. Um, and did you? Let me ask you, when you grew up, Mario, what was, and the reason why I ask is, what was your family's attitude about the paranormal or about ghosts? Was it, no, that doesn't exist? Yes, it does, but let's not talk about it.
No, they were very open to it, and honestly, it was one of the things. We like all families, we have our problems,
Mm-hmm.
but we used to bond over ghost stories from especially from Mexico, because my family comes from Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
and when it was a one time that the kids and the adults would really connect, because as a kid, you normally don't want to hear what adults have to say because it just
Right.
bores you, because adults are boring. Uh,
Yeah.
but we'd have our family barbecues, we'd eat, and then maybe one of my aunts starts to tell a story. Oh, when I lived in Guadalajara, I remember this time I saw your uncle who had been dead for 10 years, and I told him, what are you doing here? So naturally, when those stories would start,
Right.
us kids would want to sit around and listen to what the adults had to say, because
Yeah.
naturally it was really fascinating. So yeah, my family was very open to it, and we really enjoyed. Well, the adults really enjoyed telling the stories about the paranormal, and we really enjoyed listening to it as kids.
Right. So it wasn't like, because I've heard of some people, sometimes they have experiences when their children and the parents or their family are like, don't talk about that again. It was just your imagination. And it's like, yeah.
Right. Right.
And yeah, in other words, it doesn't. And I know you did a Spanish version of this book, which is the
Right.
equivalent of I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, I forgot how you translated the title. Casas
El,
Embrujadas or
el
something.
este de Los Ángeles embrujado.
Embrujados. Okay. And how has that done? Because I know that as Hispanics, the belief in ghosts and in fantasmas and things like this it has its own different flavor, um, as far as and like you said, and I that people have long memories either for houses or for family stories or things of this nature, where that, or people talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and even 50 or 60 years, oh, that certain house has this reputation, or like you said, your grandfather, your grandmother had this. How has the book done, the Spanish translation?
I mean, we sold some copies.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the reason we did it is because, I mean, I grew up in a house where we didn't speak English until I was 5 years old when I started going to school.
Right.
And if you know anything about East LA, everyone speaks Spanish in East
Right,
LA,
right,
by and large.
exactly.
So, I mean, to write a book like Haunted East Los Angeles and not translate it into Spanish,
Yeah.
it just wouldn't make sense to me because, so many people speak Spanish, and I wanted, the Spanish-only speaking community to also
Okay.
partake in these discussions, because I do book talks at the local libraries, and, believe it or not, a lot of people would show up, and we'd end up having these really rich and dense conversations about the paranormal, and just bonding with complete strangers over stories in English and in Spanish it was a great bonding experience for some community members, including myself.
Haven't you heard? I don't know about you, but in my experience, usually at stuff like that, you hear the most interesting stories from people that are usually very down to earth. And when they tell you these things, they're very believable. I mean, it's like, and they tell you these stories, and you're like, wow, that's incredible. And sometimes things that happened to them when they were children, other times, as an adult. And sometimes it's just one or two experiences. It's not like a lifelong thing of experiences, but it's something that you never forget when when people tell those stories. Which to me personally, since I've been working, I've been doing paranormal research since the 1990s, and God knows I've heard a million different stories about different things, you name it, and there's always a quality that you get from certain people that tell those stories where it's an isolated incident. But sometimes they're either the most interesting or the most disturbing in some cases, depending on what the nature of the story is. Did you ever run across anybody, let's say, at one of these talks that gave you some more information into any of the stories that you were already working on?
Yeah. On the stories we were working on, I mean, the Linda Vista one for sure. We had people show up and tell us, because I never got to tour it when it was open, when it was still, Linda Vista Hospital, paranormal enthusiasts Mecca. I didn't get to tour it then. But,
Yeah, okay.
but a lot of people that came to the book talks were like, yeah, I got to tour it, and they would tell me their experiences. And I think, wow, that's really amazing. I mean, one guy came in and started telling us, complete skeptic. I took a tour, and he said, we went in, and I swear this ball of light just started forming right in front of me. And then it was growing and growing and growing, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at, so I asked my buddy, do you see what I'm seeing? He says, yeah. What the hell is that? And this ball of light just started dancing around, and it just shot away, and it just disappeared. And he said, like you said, I can't rationalize it. I mean, there was no light in there. It was the middle of the night. Where would that ball of light come from? But he says, I saw it plain as day. It was a ball of light. It was bright, and it was moving around, and then it just shot away. And he says, I know. He says, I know that's not an amazing, like, oh, I saw a full-bodied apparition. He says, but you got to understand, I was a complete skeptic, and to see something like that made me a believer, because there was no way I was gonna explain that scientifically or in other than I don't know what the heck that was.
And see, that's the thing where that's what I'm saying, that when these people have these experience, even if, like he said, it doesn't have to be a full body apparition, but there's something that once you go through this mental checklist of what could it be to explain it, and you know that none of them apply, and then what you're left with is the paranormal. It's like, I can't lie to myself. That kind of deal. And then that's when they have to.
These are folks that, some people, I met people who jump to conclusions right away. Oh, it's paranormal. And it's like, there could be other explanations for it. but I've also met very people who aren't very excitable, who, like you just said, they go through, well, it could have been this. No, no, no. I don't know what it was. I mean, it might be something that's not of this earth or not explainable through just fact or reason or logic. So, yeah, it's
Exactly.
exactly like you said. People arrive, when you don't have an answer, naturally you open yourself up to the possibility that it could be a ghost or something.
Have you gone before, or are you going out with any paranormal groups just to go with them, or do you have a group that you belong to already?
I really don't. I really don't. When I wrote the book, I
Hmm.
wrote it because I wanted to bond with my cousin.
Okay.
So, because he's really into it, he came to my office and he would tell me all these great stories. And I thought, man, you know what? Why don't you keep telling me these stories and I'll sit down and I'll write them.
Ah, that's
And so he
great.
did. And that's kind of how I came into the paranormal community. I mean, I wasn't really involved before. And
Okay.
I don't really go out with groups to do ghost hunts or to try to get EVPs. I've done
Hmm.
it once or twice, but I mean, I get asked for interviews a lot or to do book talks, but I never get asked to come along on a ghost hunt.
Well, you know what? I know some authors that sometimes what they do is they just go there. In other words, um, almost like a witness. Something happens, great. I'm there and I capture it, especially depends on where they're going. And other times, which I know from personal experience, it's really boring because nothing happens. Or if they capture something, it's after the fact where they start reviewing, their footage or whatever. But I know some authors that, especially if it's like a group that's, professional and well established and they're going to some interesting place, they kind of hang out and they're like like the reporter, the journalist in the group, like I'm gonna be there, and I'm in case you guys have a great moment coming on because, and I tell this all the time, the supernatural is not an on-demand thing. Sometimes you go there, nothing happens, and then other times you arrive right at the perfect time, as in the date that you're there, and luckily, you capture a lot of stuff right in your face. It doesn't You don't even have to wait to get back, but a lot of times you don't. Contrary to what they show on the TV shows, it's you go a lot of times and it's like, you're falling asleep because it's just nothing materializes. Um, do you have another book planned? Are you going to do any more? So, because I imagine there's got to be a lot of places out there in East LA that've got.
You know, yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I'm sorry. That I imagine there's a lot of places out there that've got a reputation for either being haunted or things going on, and
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of places, um, and I've been wanting to work on another book. I am so busy. I run
I
I
know.
run businesses, and I have two boys.
Oh
Uh,
God.
and but like what I like about Haunted East LA a lot is that a lot of these locations people didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of want to do the same thing with the next book.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
there are a lot of great places in LA, but I really don't want to do the famous ones. I want to do
Oh
the
no
less
no
well
no
known.
no. That's exactly what I'm getting to. That to me. I'm telling you because that's another thing. I've read books left, right, back. That I mean, you name it. And it's like after a while, and I'm sure you've seen it. The same spots. Case in point, Linda Vista Hospital, where everybody and their second cousin has done, gone and done the show on it and things like that. To me, after a while, what I want to hear about or I want to see is what are these haunted locations, whether it's a historic site or somebody's house, or like you had that school, that it's usually the people that live in the area or the paranormal groups that work in the area which know about them. Okay. Those to me are the most interesting, especially because to me there's just an air validity to them. Even though I will be perfectly honest with you, as far as not Linda Vista, any hospital, whether it's a hospital, a prison, an insane asylum, those, look, you don't have to investigate it. I can tell you without going that it's going to be haunted. It is. it's just because of the type of people that at some point were housed there or spent time there or the events that took place there. It's almost a given. You're going to have some type of intelligent haunting. It's interesting though to go and and capture evidence, but like that example that you gave of that middle school, yeah, you had your dad walking around the perimeter, and all he's doing is just walking for his health, and he's listening to children laugh, and he's like, oh, and after a while, you realize where could it be coming from. And I'm gonna
Right.
give you a perfect example. One time, I used to work many years ago, back in the 1980s. Used to walk. We used to work in a big building, and it was across the street was a mall, like the back end of the mall. In other words, and of course, us girls, we would take our lunch hour and we would cross over and go shopping. And I remember it was like two or three of us. Uh, it's the middle of the day on a weekday, so the mall was full, but not really that full. And where we would go through the parking lot was kind of wasn't that many cars per se. And as we're crossing in the middle of the parking lot, we start hearing a baby crying, like crying. And I remember it took us for a minute because we're all talking left, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden we all look because we all had kids. We all stop and we look at each other and we're like, God, that's a baby crying. And we were like, where's the baby? What? We're looking like all look because, and it's not like a muffled crying. It was distinctly a child crying, like a baby, not a child, a baby. And we're all looking around us across the street. We're looking. We looked around at even some of the cars, but we're thinking there was no baby. There was, and all of a
Right.
sudden, as it,
Wow.
how when children cry, they cry and then they kind of like go down, like, they kind of, it went from crying, and then it's just stopped, like stopped, like not a whimpering, it stopped. And I remember we were there. We didn't want to leave. We were like, "What? There's a baby here. Something's going on." Somebody. We weren't thinking nothing paranormal, by the way. We were thinking we were hearing a real kid, a baby, crying in the middle of a parking lot of a shopping center. Um, and that happened to us a couple of times, and I can't account for it. Nobody could account for it. And like I said, and this was in broad daylight. This was in the middle of the afternoon. Okay, there was no school nearby. There was no daycare. There was nothing. Um, it was like a corporate kind of area. And what I'm saying is that there was office buildings, and then next to it was a mall. So there's no houses, nothing where this baby's cry is going to travel. What? Which, by the way, that's another thing. Uh, it was very loud. It was like almost like right next to us. And that's one of the things I think that after a while it just broke into our conversation. So that's what I'm saying. When you hear to me, stories like that, when people have those very what I call down to earth stories, those are the ones that for me are sometimes have the most validity. They're the most disturbing. They're the ones that, if you have any doubts or if you are a non-believer in the paranormal, these are the ones that make you want to stop and say, okay, if I don't out and out believe in it, in the supernatural, at least I'm going to leave that door open because I there might be something there that happens once we die, as far as the human spirit is concerned, anyway. So, yes,
Yeah.
I hope you do another book like that because I think that I love those types of books. I love those types of books. And let me ask you, w- when you grew up and like you said, what is it? You grew up in that same neighborhood throughout your for a lot of years in that same location, right?
Yes.
Okay. Uh, as far as did they have? And I'm asking this because I know sometimes did they have any type of hmm, how can I say it? Was there any? And the reason why I ask is sometimes how kids grow up that they're kind of scared sometimes with like a certain type of boogeyman. Everybody's got a different one. Sometimes it's uh, somebody that was in the neighborhood, like a certain guy's gonna get you. Did you guys ever have anything like that out there in East LA that you guys were scared with when you were growing up, especially when you're young? I'm talking about children.
We had, and I'm kind of conflicted to tell this story because this is a human being we're talking about.
Okay.
But there was a lady, which we don't know what her deal was, but everyone was afraid of her.
Okay.
When you would walk to school, she lived on, I want to say, a corner house, an old dilapidated house,
Okay.
and her nickname was La Cebolla,
Oh
which
my God,
translates
the
to
onion.
the onion. Yes, La Cebolla. And she would come out if you got near her house, and she would start just losing it,
Really?
And it looked like she wanted to attack you, and everyone. I mean, she became really famous. La Cebolla is gonna get you. So I mean, that's probably the closest thing we had.
Well, let me tell you something. It probably worked because you knew La Cebolla really existed.
Oh man, La Cebolla. Yeah, La Cebolla. I mean, as kids, we didn't know. I mean, we used to get scared though when she would come out.
I bet she's probably suffering from some type of mental illness or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
when
I'm,
you're
I'm
a
sure she
kid, I'm
was.
telling you, that'll scare you. That'll scare you. That's a good story. That's a great story, that. And I know where you're coming from. I understand that you understand, but at the same time, for the purposes of what we're talking about, that came in pretty handy for parents.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Mario, for spending this time. I am looking forward to hopefully seeing another book from you from real true stories from East LA. I'm going to have a credit to your author's page on Amazon, which is where you have the book for sale, and also to your Facebook page. And again, thank you so much for spending this time. I have really truly enjoyed it. Like I said, I'm
Thank
I'm
you.
looking forward to seeing that book, that another book from you with all those what I call down to earth neighborhood stories.
Thank you, Marlene. It was a real pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, take care. Bye
Okay.
bye. So, guys, what did you think? Huh? I don't know about you. I love talking to authors. You know, I love talking to authors because, yeah, you have paranormal investigators slash authors. You have people that are just paranormal investigators, and then, and again, what we were talking about when I'm talking to him is when people grow up, especially like when you grow up, and I'm saying you spend a few years in the neighborhood, not a couple. Um, you get to know all these stories that are great, that are fantastic. They're just unknown. And I think everybody, that's why I even asked him about this. Do you guys have a local boogeyman? Because sometimes parents do exactly what they did. They use somebody, local, in other words, uh, to get their kids to obey. And as a matter of fact, I mean, if you look even at a lot of horror stories that they have about different boogeymans or the lady this, usually they're the movies in Hollywood, they usually draw off of supposedly local legends of something that happened or somebody that did this or I mean, that's look at Freddy. Freddy was supposedly a guy that had supposedly really existed, had killed kids, and then, so a lot of the origins of even now a lot of horror slash slasher movies are people according to the storyline that at one time were alive, and they become boogeyman, and then of course then it goes in a different direction in the movie. So that's why I asked him about that. But again, I think sometimes because of the way shows are, we get carried away thinking that really scary, uh, disturbing ghost stories are only going to be found in hospitals, insane asylums, prisons, which they are. Don't get me wrong, they are. But people think um, that this is the place where you're going to get the big, scary wow. Believe me, I know. I've been to a lot of. I've been to Waverly. I've been to Moundsville. I mean, I've been to Trans-Allegheny. Let me tell you something. Those tours are chock full. They people go there because of the wow factor. I mean, historically, excuse me, they're wonderful to be at just for the history. But people go there because, of course, they're thinking if there's any place that I'm going to have the shock is going to be one. And it's like, no. Yes, they do. Maybe because of the odds. But you would be surprised how many dark and disturbing ghost stories take place in regular neighborhoods, in regular houses. Okay? I'm gonna give you, for instance, and you're gonna see it. I'm gonna have a show on this, probably air like a couple of weeks after this one. Yesterday, I was out filming for another show up in a park here in Central Florida. Got talking to some people. We go back, we talk. This guy's telling me that when he's a kid, he's originally from New York, telling us the story how he's a kid. You know, up there they have the basements that people use, convert them and use for different things. So he says that he's a kid. His parents kind of made the basement like I guess the hangout place for the kids and the teenagers in the family. So he's telling me the story how him and his friends would see these shadows. But he was telling me that the basement had, those windows along basically the base of, well, the bottom of the house that basically are the top of the basement. And he said that even while he knew and him and his friends were seeing these shadows that really didn't make sense, they kind of blew it off thinking, oh yeah, it's a shadow, somebody walking on the outside and it's casting a shadow through this little window and it's casting a full body shadow on the wall. But he said, yeah, me and my friends, we weren't going to try to figure it out. But he says one day, him and his one friend are down there, okay, and they see a full body apparition of a man. And he said the guy was dressed in a suit from like the 1930s or 40s, like he said, like a guy in his 50s. He says he saw the guy walk across and basically go down this little hallway like out of sight. But he knew that when you went there was only a wall. Like there's no, but him and his friend got up. He says he looked at his friend looked at me, he goes, did you see what I saw? He goes, yeah, did you see the guy? Yeah. So they both get up. They go there, of course, knowing there's a wall. Like, where is this guy going? First of all, where did he come from and where is he going to go? Of course, there's nothing there. So he says, man, this was, I think he was 13 or 14 or 15. He was a teenager. He goes, even this one, I couldn't not think about that. So he ends up either that day or the next day telling his mother about it. And he tells Ma, I saw this. What? Tells him, well, guess what? That spot where you saw him, I never told you guys about it, but the owner of the house here, the spot where you saw him at, there used to be a trap door up there. And apparently, he came home one night and forgot, didn't know, who knows what, that trap door was open. He fell down and he got killed. He fell through the trap door. Apparently, from what he explained to me, that trap door, the purpose of it at one point was, I guess, to get coal down into the basement. Because I said, of course, I'm in Florida, we don't have any basements. But I said, what's the use of the trap door? He goes, no, that they would use it sometimes to get the coal down into the basement area. Apparently, the guy didn't know, forgot, I don't know what, falls through the trap door, gets killed. And it coincided with, she says, no, it was a guy about the 50s, blah, 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 blah. And he got killed. That was the prior owner of this house. And he says that once they saw that shadow, they saw the guy. He says they never saw the shadows anymore along the wall. And I was like, that is fascinating. Okay. The only way, I think that's a great ghost story, by the way. The only way that you get those stories when you do that. When you talk to people or from that neighborhood or stuff like that. I'm sure there's probably even people in that neighborhood who probably even knew the guy who used to live there or knew whatever from it. You know, catch that show when I do interview this man. He's great. He's got some fantastic stories. I was like, I could be with you here all night long. Just keep giving me these stories. But what I'm saying is, the in your face ghost story and from very very credible people. In other words, this is not somebody on a show that's trying to get his ratings or what. This is stuff that happens to people, that it happens to them. They're not looking for it. It just happens to them. And uh, if you're one of those that are into this paranormal, the supernatural, yeah, it's great. If you want to travel to these places, these haunted places, go ahead. The historical, absolutely. But the truth is, you don't have to travel far to find a really, really interesting, disturbing ghost stories about supernatural, about a lot of things. All you have to do is start looking around and asking the right questions to the right people, and you'd be surprised what you come up with. That will absolutely make your hair stand on end. So anyway, guys, like the video, please subscribe to my channel. Again, I'm going to put out to the true believers out there, if you could please record yourself telling me your ghost story. You can either use your phone, record it and send me the MP3, go to my website, Marlene at MiamiGhostChronicles.com. You can also find me on Twitter, on Facebook. That's where I stream a lot. Because, like I said, I think that is where I see absolutely the most interesting, the best cases, and the email doesn't quite capture it. If you have no other choice and you want to email me the story, okay. But if you can, I would love for you to record it, either visually, video, or just record yourself telling me the story. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't worry about it. You don't need to rehearse it. If you only want me to use first names, I will do that. Don't worry about if it sounds crazy. Crazy's fine with me. As a matter of fact, I love crazy. Crazy and weird. Why be normal? So, guys, thank you so much for viewing and for listening. Which, by the way, I have podcast versions of all my shows on iTunes, on Spreaker, on iHeartRadio, on Google Plus, and you can go to my website if you want to download a podcast version, either listen to it or download the MP3 file if you want to go ahead and just listen to the show afterwards. So again, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate my audience. Take care.